I would go to see clients. Most clients, because I had black hair, I looked younger, would make me sit outside in the reception for the chairman to come or the CEO to come. Suddenly, with white hair, I would get ushered in directly into the boardroom. I would be given better cutlery to drink my tea. Right? I mean, these are subtle things, but it kind of tells you, at least in our ecosystem, how, age is respected.
In this episode of the AgeTech Podcast, I'm joined by Neeraj Segar from Wisdom Circle to unpack how they're creating purpose-driven jobs for the wisdom generation. Neeraj, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Good to see you again.
So, can you tell us the origin story of Wisdom Circle? What drove you to start this company?
It's so couple of reasons. So number one was I used to color my hair. And I used to color my hair till I was in my early 40s. I'm 54 right now. And when I stopped coloring my hair, I suddenly realized everything had gone white. And then people started looking at me different. Like I was getting a lot more respect. I used to be able, I could formally cut lines just because I was considered older. I always got a seat on a public transport because people older than me would get up for me. I started getting more discounts at pharmacies. It was quite interesting, right? So when that started happening, and I think, in my early 40s then, I said, look, there's something here. Something is not right, right? Because I was the same person and suddenly people were treating me with a lot of respect. But at the same time, there were also this other group that was saying, oh, it's he that, won't be able to do it. He's old. So in fact, one of my colleagues who was older than me in my company asked me when I was retiring, and I told him, I said, look, I'm younger than you. And he had another 10 years to retire. So he's like, oh, really? So I think in a way that started playing in my head saying, look, there is something here about aging that I am not familiar with. And then COVID happened. And so I used to be a headhunter. I worked with a firm called Egon Zender. So I used to have a lot of people who would reach out to me for advice saying, Neeraj, we are retiring. What should we do? And I honestly, I work for one of the largest search firms in the world. And even I didn't have an answer. Right? So, you could be a board member, an advisor, but there were not enough opportunities. So that was playing on one side, which is every day sort of interacting with people who were nearing formal retirement, me being considered older and therefore getting a lot of respect. And the third thing that happened was COVID. And when COVID happened, and this is when I took your course and I sort of learned a lot about AgeTech, saw the AgeTech map for the first time. I did a lot of introspection and learning around the science of longevity. And when what I realized was that everyone was solving for us to live longer. But the gap I saw was no one was solving for what will people do if they live longer. So that's in a way, and I said, look, I am good at. So initially when I started, the idea was I can do this, I can do that. But then I narrowed it down to saying, look, what am I good at? And I'm good at connecting organizations to individuals. And I said, look, can I take that and use that in this world of post-career is what we call it now, where people have stepped away from full-time careers and connect them to organizations that can leverage their wisdom, their experience, their knowledge for the benefit of organizations, and in return, giving individuals an extension of purpose. So that's the origin story.
I love that. I love that once you stop dyeing your hair in your 40s, you suddenly started treating you differently, both with respect and also with some aspects of ageism.
Here's one specific example. So I used to, because I was in client service, right? I would go to see clients. Some clients, in fact, most clients, because I had black hair, I looked younger, would make me sit outside in the reception for the chairman to come or the CEO to come. Suddenly, with white hair, I would get ushered in directly into the boardroom. I would be given better cutlery to drink my tea. Right? I mean, these are subtle things, but it kind of tells you, at least in our ecosystem, how, age is respected. So in fact, to me, it's actually the positive side of ageism in a way. Again, but at the same time, there is the downside of, I don't think he's capable of doing, X or Y. But it just was still.
I find it really interesting that even people who knew you personally, like your colleagues, treated you differently.
And
Wow.
it's but that's the introspection that started saying, look, there's something here. There's something that we socially experience it, but don't get to think about it. So in fact, I think I'm fortunate that I got to think about it earlier. And therefore what started, and you of course have started this much, much earlier. Right. So for me, it was a big learning. I mean, I was thinking, shit, why did I stop coloring my hair even 10 years, even earlier? Because I used to, I have a genetic white hair problem.
Yeah.
And I think, anyway,
You could have been getting the good cutlery all along.
that's what I'm saying. And I went to renew my driver's license during COVID, and I was in and out of an Indian driving license renewal office in 15 minutes. Because the guy who was ushering people in saw me with white hair, called me in saying, "Sir, you go right in the front." It has never happened to me in my life, right?
I
India's all about lines. Here I was getting preferential treatment, so it was quite nice.
Wow. It kind of feels like a cultural thing. I don't feel that you could cut in line in most other countries just
Correct,
because
correct.
your hair is white.
I think that
Um,
correct. I sometimes take the local metro to work. There's a section of where they have, so if you're pregnant, if you're older, if you're handicapped, so there are these reserved, seats. I always go and stand there. And there's always somebody who gets up for me. And there's sometimes there are people who are older than me who get up for me. And, you know, when, and I've realized that giving people your seat is good for the people who are giving the seat. So I accept the seat and I sit down because
yeah,
I want to make other people feel better about themselves. So,
sure. Yeah, it definitely feels good giving up your seat in public transport.
yeah.
So how does Wisdom Circle work? Let's say I am a newly retired person. So I went traveling, now I'm back. I want to find a new career adventure. I sign up for Wisdom Circle, and then what?
Okay. So actually, let me take a step back and actually explain to you what our model is, how and what are we really solving. So the first thing we do is, so we are essentially a marketplace that is trying to connect organizations to post-career professionals. It just so happens we have way more post-career professionals who want to work than organizations or roles so far. So just to give you some numbers, we have about 100,000 people who've signed up on our platform, white collared. So we cater to white collared, 50 plus, but we don't have any restriction. Anyone can sign up, even if you're in your 40s, that whatever you can sign up because we don't stop anybody from signing up. Because our view is, look, you're going to get old one day. So and and we are here to stay. So come, the door is open. So that's what we call supply, which is people with post career professionals signing up. Our focus is only short duration or part time roles. We do not do career roles because we say, look, if you're looking for a career, the way we define a career is a role where if you work very well, you get a promotion. That's a career role. We say, if you're looking for a career role, don't come to Wisdom Circle. But if you're looking for a good short term or part time engagement, come sign up. Right. So that's the supply side. On the demand side, we do the same thing with organizations. We tell organizations, look, if you want to tap into this talent pool, please come sign up and we will help you find. And so, and I'll tell you what we've learned also. That was the original design, and that's how we are still working. We started with India. Now we are actually in Europe, we are in the UK, we are in the Middle East, we are in Singapore, and we are in Africa. Because we realized that we are in a way connecting talent pools across the world. So if someone is, for example, let's say engineers in Germany who are retired, if Germany can't absorb them, can other countries absorb them? So we focus on specific skills and matching them. So the real business we are in, honestly, is creating jobs. Because there are way more people who want to contribute meaningfully than there are formal jobs today in the market. Because a lot of people worry about jobs, that you're taking away jobs from younger people. Younger people need those jobs, especially in countries like ours in India. that worries that. And we tell people, look, we are not here to displace younger people's jobs. We are here to supplement those jobs. We are here to add value to organizations that can either train their younger people, can bring in expertise which would otherwise take much longer to get, or otherwise you have to go to a consulting company to hire. And honestly, these people can join much faster. They don't have notice periods. They're not driven by money. I'm not saying money is not important, but they're not driven by money. So essentially for both sides, for the supply side, we are solving for relevance and respect. Because what we realize is, at the end, as we get older, we want to feel relevant, and getting paid is a form of respect. Right? So that's what we are solving for younger, for the supply side, retirees, if you will. And for the organizations, we are solving for faster hires, value additive people who basically come in and hit the ground running, who are less expensive per unit of wisdom. I think there's something I've coined. I said, look, how do I explain? Because per unit of wisdom, people who are wiser are actually much more economical. Like, of course, we don't, say it explicitly because it sounds very transactional when you talk about intelligence. But we tell organizations that, look, you can get someone who can come in with a lot more experience, who can upskill your younger people, who can bring in a specific expertise that you otherwise would have to go to a consulting company to hire. Because companies use this. So we are in the, and what you realize is that there's nobody really thinking about this globally at the scale we are thinking about. Because our view is every single person who has stepped away from a full-time career, who's over the age of 50, should first come to our platform to find meaningful work. And meaningful work for us is three kinds. One is professional work, which is organizations that are leveraging your skills, supply chain, manufacturing, marketing, finance, whatever it may be. The second is we want to create 1 million teachers out of this segment, it's a struggle because the monetization model isn't good. But our viewers, look, you have so much wealth of experience. And at one level, we all talk about shortage of educators, shortage of this. And again, AI is a different ballgame when we talk about that. And the third is actually doing work in the social sector. We've actually been surprised that we have found more acceptance with non-profit and social organizations wanting to hire post-career professionals to actually formalize or professionalize their social impact organizations. They may not be able to pay as well, but again, this segment is not only looking for money, they're looking for relevance. And sometimes working for a non-profit gives them that. So to answer your question, they come in, they sign up, and they can see the roles.
It doesn't surprise me at all that the nonprofit sectors or organizations that are trying to do something for the greater good are more open to hiring these, like you said, post-career individuals. Because in these sectors, experience is really something that is valued, and they don't necessarily chase after the younger employees who are willing to work 20 hours a day.
And the learning. So we've interviewed thousands of people, right? And in a way, Karen, I've come up with, and I'm not sure if this may be a good forum to sort of tell you this, and maybe this is something. And we've interviewed thousands of people across countries, right? Because we realized that the problem that we are trying to address is the same in no matter which country. The manifestation of it is different, right? Because, for example, in some markets, earning money is more important because the government support systems are not as strong. But if you go to Europe, it's very different. If you go to Asia, there's some countries where the pension systems are much stronger. So where people have saved up enough or are going to get enough, where they're not wanting to work only for the money. But then there are some countries where money is important because if you have to survive and the social infrastructure is not supporting you, you need the money, right, to pay for health insurance costs, to pay for living costs and the like. But the fundamental, this thing is around relevance, right? So that's the consistent theme across. Anyway, I can keep going, so I will pause there and let you ask the questions because I can get distracted very quickly.
Sure. So how does the matching work? I assume there is like some AI in the back end that you're using. How does that work?
Right. Well, it's actually quite simple. I mean, So right now, so we built an AI tool which matches people's expectations with roles that are posted. And it's again a very simple, again, not simple now because AI is much simpler now than it was even before we started. So for example, organizations can come in, put a JD and within seconds actually see, here are the 5 most relevant people on our platform that fit. They can invite them to apply. Now, here's what's different about our model. In our model, we do not give access to a database, right? So what we say is the way, and this is the search learning that I've had because being an executive search consultant. What we tell people is that, look, post a role and wait for people to apply. Only if they apply are they then screened and considered. Now, here's the difference, right? When you post a role, you have to be clear with how much you're going to pay people, right? You say, look, I need you for, X many days a month. I'm going to pay you so many dollars a month. They have to be clear with that number. This whole notion of negotiation, we've actually taken out of the system. Because one of the things we've realized that we studied this segment, quite a lot. We've realized that people at this age don't want to negotiate, right? What they're saying is, show me a role. If I like it, I will apply. Again, very different from executive search or finding a job when we are younger. Now, and we run this confidentially because people don't want to, show that they're looking for a job. And it's also, there are all these very interesting nuances of this segment. So we've of course made the UI UX very friendly, etc. So coming back with the tools, the AI uses a lot of the algorithmic functions that we have defined, both on what people want, what companies want, and what is fixed versus what is negotiable. So we don't have negotiable options. Because in normal placements, compensation negotiation is the most complicated part of closure. We have taken that out of the system. We're saying there is no negotiation. We tell organizations you have to be fair because if you're not fair, you will not get the right people to apply. If you want the right people to apply, put out what you can pay for a role like this, let people apply, and then you screen them if they fit what you need. So that is what is working and what is very different for us. And now in the background, there's a lot of interesting matching that works. We, of course, have built a lot of AI backend technology. We are not doing AI front end because what we realize is, one, this segment that we are catering to prefers a lot more human interaction, prefers a lot more, like we have a number where somebody can call 24/7. So we are doing things. Now, it will evolve over time because as today's 40-year-old becomes 50-year-old, their requirements will be different. So our company will evolve as we get older or as we also become more experienced in doing it. But right now we are solving for today's segment. So our view is solve for today, evolve as the segment evolves.
I love that. And so it's a very high tech, high touch type of
Correct.
startup.
And it's also, and by the way, we've also built the community. So what we realized now, what we realized, because we can't help everyone, right? So, I mean, just even as today, right? We have 2,000 odd roles. We have 100,000 people on the platform. I can't help all, although I would love to figure out how to help all 100,000 find something. While we work on creating more jobs, there are many, many people who will be disappointed when they come. So a couple of things, right? We don't charge anybody to come sign up on our platform because, one, it's not fair, right? I think this segment also doesn't like spending on themselves. And that's something we've learned. So anyone is free to come sign up. We've also built a community and community groups where a lot of people engage on. We also give them a lot on in terms of, we hold curiosity talks. That's what we call it, by the way, where people from the segment come in and talk about something that they know. We bring in speakers to talk about something. So we every week we do engagement and it's free because it allows people to stay connected with this. And we have Ask Us Anything sessions on how to sign up and all of that. So that's one big piece of what we do, because our monetization model comes from organizations who leverage these folks as opposed to from people who want jobs.
That makes a lot of sense.
By the way, the other thing which we started doing, which we realized is we are also helping organizations manage their own retirees, right? So a lot of organizations want to do good for their retirees, but don't know what to do. Because they'll do training programs. They'll say, look, we can help you with finance, financial planning and the like. But, a lot of them, this whole move towards purpose, understanding what you can do after, the structure of which I will just tell you the framework that we've come up with, the ideal 7-day framework that is working to start helping people start working in social impact or if education before they retire. So that once they have stepped away from full-time careers, they at least have options of how they can meaningfully use their time.
That is
Let me know when you
awesome.
want to hear my 7-day framework. I will tell you, but I will do that later.
Okay, well, let's come back to that because I have one more question before we dive into that. Have you had any requests from the people on the platform to help them with preparing for job interviews or reskilling or upskilling? Let's say people have been out of the workforce for a year or two. They may feel like their knowledge is outdated. Can you help with that too?
Oh, actually, we've been very explicit that that's not something we do. And there's a reason we've done that, because we've learned, that to do so. What the path we as wisdom circles have chosen is to go down a very specific area and do it extremely well. The moment we start putting in reskilling with it, it starts changing the culture of the company. It starts changing, because at the end, what we realize what really matters is what do you do after you get reskilled. And I think the bigger problem right now, Karen, and by the way, we've seen this in Singapore, for example. The Singapore government spends a lot on reskilling, but what do people do after they get reskilled is still a gap. So we have chosen not to do that. Do we get requests? Yes, we do. We actually direct them towards other partners or like organizations that do it. We ourselves don't do reskilling because it just is and given that we are a startup, we are a funded startup, our focus is on having a profitable business first and to grow this business internationally so that we can help not 100,000, a million, but our goal is 10 to 100 million people in the next 3 to 5 years, right? Is what we want to help. But for that, we need to create jobs. So we are right now very single-mindedly focused on creating jobs because otherwise, as you said, right? And for me especially, I'm actually like the reason I like your AgeTech map is because there's so much you can do in this space, right? And I get distracted, right? Every time I see a new idea, I'm like, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. But in a way, I've had to focus myself to say focus and get this one thing right before I expand into other things. So, but what we do, Karen, is these sessions that we hold, like for example, we'll hold sessions on generative AI or what's happening in it. And again, we'll hold these with people who really know the space. And by the way, you're right. I think this segment is so curious about learning and learning new things. We always underestimate that, people don't want to learn. I mean, the amount of inquisitiveness and curiosity that exists in this segment is amazing. Right? They absorb things so quickly and they want to, right? And they go deep. So we host sessions for them to, like, for example, we're about to hold a session on purpose. And we're doing it with a gentleman called Jake in London, who's going to talk about the science of purpose, which has to do with flow, and matching it with skills. So we're giving them the tools and the structures to think about it and go deeper with our partners than us doing it. And
Absolutely.
I'm telling you, this segment is so curious, Karen. I think what I like is, look, I think the world is fine. I think this whole notion of humanity and what will humanity do in the world of AI, I think there is, yes, it's something we should worry about, but, humanity and wise people will find a way. And I truly, I think my view has improved so much because, there's always this, AI is going to take away jobs and the world is going to come to an end. And Bill Gates is saying we only have to work 2 days a week. Yes, but you know what? We will find a way to contribute to the betterment of humanity as a whole if left onto ourselves.
Absolutely. And everything you said makes a lot of sense because eventually at the end of the day, as a marketplace type of startup, you have to figure out the supply and demand. And it sounds like the demand here is the tricky part to figure out.
Correct.
So tell me about this 7-day framework.
Okay. So what we did was in these last 3 years, we've interviewed many people, both in India and overseas. And what we are trying to figure out, so a couple of learnings. So what we are trying to figure out is what is an ideal 65-year-old happy person? Okay. So our thing was, let's interview a lot of people and figure out what makes people happy. Right. And especially as you get older, what are the different things that they are doing meaningfully that is giving them purpose, joy, happiness, and keeps their blood pressure low, keeps their health metrics in check, and in general you see them smiling, right? So that is our purpose. So as we interviewed people, so a couple of learnings. The first, so this is away from the 7-day framework, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate to say it on this platform, but I still say it, and you can decide to keep it or not. But one thing that we learned is people who have daughters are happier. And we tested. We of course we believed in the hypotheses, but and I have 2 sons. My brother has 2 sons. My parents had 2 sons. So I think I'm the complete opposite, right? So I'm poor parents and poor us. But anyone who has daughters is just happier as they age, especially the men, right? So that was one big learning and aha moment for us. And I also realized that like 70% of our team is women. And I realized that women in general have a much more connect with the solutioning for this segment than men do. It's not against men. I'm just saying women are just better at doing it. That was the first learning. The second learning was that, which is now this 7-day framework. So think of the 65-year-old who's happy, has a daughter or daughters, and now they have this 7-day framework. Now, if you don't have daughters, it's not in your control. So let's talk about the 7-day framework. Now, the 7-day framework has the first 2 days of a good, happy 65-year-old is using the first 2 days in a profession that they are good at, for which someone pays them. Okay? So if you're a good finance professional, if you're a good marketing professional, you are continuing to help advise companies in that area. They are paying you for it. And those 2 days makes you enough money for you not to dip into your savings. Okay, so that's your first 2 days. The third day is a day of teaching. And this is a one-to-many teaching, right? This is getting up in front of younger people and teaching them something. And you've talked about intergenerational connectivity. You've talked about the importance of that. And I think this piece is one that we found anyone who's doing this is generally just, again, the happiness comes from inside because they're interacting with younger people. That's the third day. The fourth day is the day of giving. Right? Working for a social impact organization, working for a cause that's closest to you, helping out in community, helping out in whichever social framework that you call yours. Right? And the third, and by the way, all this can be interacted and can be made one whole, but that's your 4th day. The 5th, 6th, and 7th day are a combination of learning. People who are curious, who are still wanting to continue learning something. It is about spending time with families, travel. It's basically your time, the 3 days. People crack this are the ones that we have found the more happier of the lot.
Fascinating. That is fascinating. Wow. And I'm not surprised that people who have daughters are happier. I feel like the academic literature in gerontology also echoes that sentiment.
The other thing, Karen, that anyway, I can keep going. I did lots of these sort of interesting learnings, but I let you ask me the questions.
So we are, actually, before I hit record, you told me something that I did not know about, was that you had a specific founders-only AgeTech network in India.
Correct.
And
Correct.
that you had over 100 people in that group, which is quite remarkable. So can you tell our audience a little bit about that? And if we have any AgeTech founders from India in the audience who haven't heard of this group yet, which I can't imagine, like how can they join?
Thank you. And let me tell you how I got the idea. So what happened was, if you remember the AgeTech course we took from you, in fact, before I started Wisdom Circle, I think one of the things you always talked about was the ecosystem. And when you showed us all the different spaces that people work in, I think for me, that triggered something in me that, look, there are so many people working in this space that we all can help each other, right? I know, yes, in some cases we compete and all of that, but at the end, we are all, the one thing that's different about this Age Tech group is, for most people, there is an underlying purpose of serving this community. And I think if you take that and you build a ecosystem just on that, and you tell people, look, this is what we're trying to do, everybody comes together. So that was the idea. And in fact, Khayal, who you also mentioned, Himanshu, was one of the first people to join the group. We had Himanshu, there's Anurag. So a lot of people actually came together. And then as we came across interesting people, we started adding them to the group. And we started asking them, you have to tell us, why are you interested in this group? What are you doing for this group? And, what is your bigger purpose? And who are you? So in a way, that sort of filtered out a lot of people who were really keen. And we started getting, so we've got a whole, set of people in all the areas, so that in fact, I think your HTech map is a lot more elaborate, because in India, but one learning we had is, by the way, we mapped all these folks into that map for India, and we realized that, man, we have big gaps. But other than that, we started bringing a lot of them together. In fact, we had a first HTech founders meetup in India last year in April, where at that time we were 40. So 40 founders showed up in Bangalore. All of us, I mean, we're at a stage we didn't even know most of each other, right? Some knew someone, but just knowing that, look, there's a huge ecosystem people are solving for, as mobility, pension plans, biohacking, care, you know, hearing aids, you name it. Right? There's someone solving some problem. So anyway, so that's how it all came together. So the way, if you're interested, if you're an HTech founder, please ping me on LinkedIn. Tell me what you're doing. We'll be happy to add you to the group. Of course, we have rules in the group. There's no good morning messages. There's no Happy New Year messages. But and there's no political, religious. We keep all of that out. It's very focused on this segment, learning about what's going on in this segment, learning from each other, and helping each other. In fact, one of the things is we say we are all competing, but the market is so big that we don't have to worry about what we are competing in. But what also happens is, whenever somebody in this group travels overseas or attends a conference, one of the things they have to do is they have to come back and summarize what they learned for everybody. Right? Because
Right.
so in a way, we're dispersing just what you are doing in your blogs and your thing. We are doing it in a smaller scale, but also, individual, like this morning as an example, one of the discussions we were having is on the caregivers and how can we create a caregiving community for the future, because India has such a huge population. And right now, for example, there's one person who set up a company where he's training Indian caregivers to go to Germany. Right? Literally, and that's his only focus. And he's raised tens of millions of dollars just to build that pipeline. What we are discussing is, there's so high attrition in caregiving in our country. How can we make sure that caregivers are given much more respect? The ecosystem can absorb them. They can get paid higher than, say, a traditional house help, because sometimes caregivers and house help are considered the same. And so there's a lot of economic mismatch. And so that's the discussion we are having on the group this morning, where everybody's chipping in. People are giving their views and what they've experienced in different parts of the country, etc. So what we are realizing is, fostering communication between people who are addressing the problem from a different perspective just helps, us sort of get going faster. And we've got, by the way, along with these startups, we've also included, so for example, Ashoka, the social impact organization, has a new longevity vertical. So their team is also on it. We've got Indian Institute of Science, which is one of the largest universities in India. They have a longevity center where they're working on the science side to longevity. They're on the group. We have a couple of nonprofits that are solving this problem. They're on the group. There's a there's a doctor focused on dementia that has only treated dementia patients all his life. and has data of more than 2,000 dementia patients that he individually has treated, that he's trying to figure out what to do. He's on the group. So we're all learning from each other on specific use cases, tapping into each other's networks and helping each other. That's what
That
we do.
is that is amazing. And to your point, India is such a huge market. Even if someone is your competitor, the pie is so big that
The pie
you
is
can get
so
a slice
big.
and you can get a slice and 10 companies can get a slice and they will all be great, profitable companies.
But Karen, I must say this, and I know I don't mean to be like sucking up, but honestly, the AgeTech map that you put together, this would not have happened if we had not started looking at the world as one AgeTech group. In fact, people ask me, why do you call it the AgeTech group? I said, I call it because of Karen's map. I did not know the word AgeTech, right? I said, it's because of your map and what you put out there. And I say, look, here are the things. And I ask everybody, tell me where you fit. And I first show them that map saying, okay, where do you fit? Can now talk to us. And now let's already do you. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, and I'm glad you found it valuable and it helps the group. And we should definitely like do a featured article on the Drone Technologist on this group and like spreading the word about all of the awesome startups coming out of India.
Done. And in fact, in the group description, the way we do it is we list out all the startups that are represented and what they're doing. So again, with their permission, I'll be happy to share it because this is so much, there's so much that has to be done for this segment. And at the end, and by the way, I mean, I'm realizing it because I am now getting close to be a part of that segment, right? So, or we are that segment. But here, by the way, here's another learning I had. Kim, I don't know how, and I'm sure you've thought about it. But I've come up with this other idea of what I call handover. Okay, so let me explain. Every person or every company that is solving a particular problem for this segment is solving it for a particular age bracket. Okay, so let's take me. Right now, my sweet spot is 55 to 70. Okay, because post 70, I realized that meaningful work reduces, care takes over because 75, 80, you start getting more health. You need more health support than you need to be able to contribute at work or need money or whatever. So I'm thinking, so my idea is literally, one way to think about it and how we thought about it is if you take age and you draw it as a horizontal and you put every company and what specific age bracket do they cater to, So for example, people who are doing, biohacking, they're working on a little more of the younger age bracket because by the time you're 60, 70, a lot of them, biohacking or measurement. The 80-year-olds don't want to measure too much except blood pressure. The versus the younger people who want to measure everything. So if you plot out which specific areas, people want, like let's say hearing aids, or you take mobility solutions. My view is if you map out the companies, figure out which company can hand over to which company. Right. So for example, between me and Khayal, as an example, right? Is there handover time when people want to stop working but want to socialize and travel more? And I think there are these interesting overlaps. And I think thinking of this word handover in a structured way in the age spectrum, as age increases, could be a very interesting way of just looking at organizations and saying, where do we stack up? Because, you can't cater to everybody from 50 to 100 in the same mindset. So anyway, that's the other learning I've had by at least going deeper into the AgeTech map that you built to say, and I always ask the question, what is the age bracket that they're targeting specifically?
Interesting. I like to look
Handover.
at it. I like to look at it as not as, I mean, when I wear my product hat, yes, it's true that many of these startups will cater to a specific age bracket, but many others will just cater to a specific challenge people experience. So for example, the startups that serve caregivers can be
That, yeah, that's
20,
a
30, 40, 50. And also people who like startups who cater for like loneliness and social isolation. People can be lonely at 60 and they can be lonely at 90. So it makes a lot of sense when we specifically look at Wisdom Circle and Kayal, because your startup has a more specific age bracket, and Kayal probably has a more specific age bracket. But I'm curious to see if you try to actually do it, if you try to do these handovers, how will that work at the ecosystem level? Because it might make
Correct.
sense to do it as
Yeah,
like partnerships, right? So you are
correct. I
catering to
think
someone who
that's
has.
basically what it is. I think you nailed it. It is partnerships because none of us can solve what everybody else is solving, right? Because or for us to build different verticals, which then it's always this question between horizontals and verticals, right? So, for example, by the way, here's the other observation I had: there's a lot of people who are solving to aggregate the segment, but and then there are lots of, as you always put in your map, there's lots of people who are going deeper in an area, and I think this balance between horizontal and vertical along with handovers like that. Anyone who's going horizontal is automatically trying to take care of handovers by partnering with many people. But the people who are going deeper need someone to hand over this segment to unless they diversify their own product portfolio. But you're right. I think, it's a more complex problem. And I know I've simplified it, but the gist of this problem was how do you build in an age aggregation for majority, not edge cases, right? So, for example, let's take hearing aids. Right? If you take hearing aids, there is an age bracket where 80% of the people lie. And then there is people who are younger or older, much older people who never, like my dad at 87, never used it or started using a hearing aid much later in life. Versus there are younger people who also sometimes need hearing aids. But if you take the edge cases out for the majority and literally saying, well, where are the majority handovers? And it, by the way, it is also real time, right? Because it's changing. Like today's digitally savvy person at 50 is going to be a very different digitally savvy person who's 50 in 20 years. So I think it's again, a lot of this will evolve as you and I evolve and our maps evolve and our thinkings evolve. Therefore, I think each of us organizations also has to be very nimble in readjusting to the changing demographics that is flowing through us, which which comes back to, by the way, we call this and we call our segment the wisdom generation. So we've come up with this, we coined this word, the wisdom generation, because there's Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and all these other sort of things, right? Which are cater to a specific when you were born. What we've said is, and by the way, the the baseline, we tell everybody, each one of us is going to pass through this wisdom generation. So no matter what you are, one day you will be old slash wise slash, in whatever. So when we started, and maybe this is an interesting framework too. So when we started our business and when we looked at your map and we said, okay, well, and so this is, by the way, my story, which I didn't talk about, is how I came up with the idea. We said, look, there are three things you can do with the wisdom generation. One is you can look at them as, okay, they have money, they have needs. So what can the world do for them? Okay. So think of it as a Venn diagram, a circle, where the world wants to sell a lot of services to them. And there's a lot of, they want help with any other things for which they can pay money. Okay. The second is, what can they do with each other? So, which is, they can travel together, they can learn together, there's community formation, etc. The third is, what can the wisdom generation do for the world? Because everyone talks about what the world can do for them. So we took the approach of what can they do for the world? And to me, if you ask me, there are two things they can do for the world. They can give their time or they can give their money. Giving money is philanthropy or, estate planning, whatever, right? But there is, and that we said, okay, is different. We are in the, what can we do with their time? How can they contribute to the world? So we are very clear that we are not selling anything to this segment. We want to tell them that you have a lot to give. How do we leverage what you have to give to people who need that giving? So that was the approach we took. And by the way, I literally took companies from your map and I started, putting them in these three. And I said, look, here's the gap. So that's how we came up with another angle of how we came up with this thing.
I love this. I'm going to maybe create a small graphic to put on the screen when you say these things, because it's such a beautiful way to segment the way people see themselves in the world, basically. Wonderful.
Think, if you think of all of us, right? I mean, we all want to feel relevant. And one way to feel relevant is by giving, by someone accepting that giving. Right? If someone accepts whatever you want to give, it makes the giver. It's the same story I was telling you. If someone gives me a seat, they feel as good as the one who's getting the seat. So therefore, I always take the seat.
Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to add? Any call to action to our audience?
Yeah, thank you. I think my one call to action is, how do we create more opportunities for this segment to contribute meaningfully? And because right now, the default notion is there are organizations that need people, and let's see if there are roles within those organizations that can be leveraged with this segment. I actually think there's a bigger problem to be solved. And it's a humanity level problem, which is only going to get bigger, which is, what are the new jobs that can be created for this segment that can just change the dynamic of this segment feeling relevant? And which means put ourselves in that spot saying, when I get to 60 or 50 or 70, what will make me feel relevant? And can we start creating those opportunities now? So I tell a lot of people, I said, look, pay it backwards, right? Start creating jobs in your organizations, because one day you are going to get old and you'll have to figure out how you can, feel relevant. So the call to action is, let's tell, and for me, it's not about wisdom circle. It's about, as a humanity level, we need to figure out how to engage this segment meaningfully. Maybe there are civic projects. Maybe there are, in AI, one of the things that I have been working with an INSEAD professor is, we are trying to figure out how can we leverage this segment to create, guardrails for artificial intelligence, right? How do we test AI models by the folks that have lived a real life to say, look, yes, this AI model is relevant for application in X or Y area based on the wisdom that they have gained over the years. So we are also thinking of new ways to create new jobs that don't exist. So if you have ideas, please, let me know what we can do to create new jobs. I think that's the call to action.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Neeraj, for this insightful conversation. And thank you for joining me on the show today. It's an absolute pleasure chatting with you, as always.
Likewise, Karen. Thank you. And thank you for all you do for all of us in the ecosystem.
Thank you. If you found this conversation insightful, you will love our episode with Himanshu Jain from Kayal, a startup that started as a small WhatsApp group and grew to 3 million users. I'll put the link right here. Until next time, stay humble, stay curious,